All right. Good morning, everybody. Um, Streaming on a day different from my normal day, and that is because I'm supposed to be working yesterday and ended up not, but also decided not to do a stream early in the morning. And there's that alarm that always goes off that I always forget about. Morning, mages. Um, yes, Labor Day. Um, Also my birthday today. Um, but yeah, it's been the constant bane of my existence my entire life. As a child, Labor Day always got in the way of birthday parties. Uh, so today we're here to talk about um, putting together or crafting low-level adventures. Coffee. So low-level adventures have sort of a bad reputation as being simple little fetch quests, especially those ones that um, you hit before you're actually on the and like we all know the clear out the rats from the merchant's basement kind of thing. Um, and while those sorts of little short quests I think are good for getting players to know their characters, know the system before they delve into something deeper, um, they don't have to necessarily be simple or boring. Morning, Cody. Um, and That's what I'm here to talk about today because I feel like there's this weird idea that low level adventures are something that we slog through to get to higher levels where our characters are more interesting, but also the adventures can be more interesting themselves. I don't think that's fair. Really, to it's not a fair assessment. I don't believe it. There's a lot at low level adventures that you can do. You just have to put in maybe a little less combat um, than you would say at higher level adventures because you know first level, second level characters are squishy, and so they're prone to easy death. Morning, Grumpy. All right, so that's sort of my base take on things is that they don't have low level adventures do not have to be simple or boring. They tend to be that way because of the way in which the game designers seem to feel that they need to structure. Like, it doesn't seem like a lot of game designers actually put a lot of work in those early quests. Um, and I think that that's a shame. Now, there are exceptions, and this is not absolute, and there are actually some really good low-level adventures. Um, and those are cool, and I appreciate those. Not having run a lot of modules myself, I'm not the best qualified to speak as to the entirety of published adventuredom. Um, but I do know pretty well the sentiments that I've run into out there with players throughout the decades. So this isn't a new thing versus an old thing or anything like that. And I even remember as a player myself when I was younger, feeling like those low level adventures were a little rinse and repeat, and wanting to get past them quick, and often starting campaigns at anywhere from levels 4 to 6. A lot of times we had a method by which we would just establish an XP level for the starting campaign. That way, we still maintained the proper dynamic between the classes in AD&D and stuff like that. So, of course, obviously, your fast track character classes are going to be a higher level than, say, like your wizard or whatever. Anyways, that all said, what do you do? And this will probably be a shortest stream today. Got some stuff I'm doing later on today, but not to mention it's just not a heavily meaty topic. Um, I personally like to lean into the role playing aspects of adventures early on. The role playing and the soft gaming skills, as I call them, investigation, exploration, things like that, that don't require the characters to be of a particularly effective level and leans more on the player to allow for those adventures to have some meat on their bones and to be um, worthwhile. Um, the go bash a bunch of goblins is likely to kill a party early on. Um, the even the rats in the basement can likely kill a party member depending on which version of D&D you're playing. And they just feel kind of dry. So a part of that comes down to also how you set up your gaming setting and your world. If you're home brewing, you want to pepper your starting area with lots of little low level things. Keep on the Borderlands does this pretty well by having a few things out there. You've got like the Hermit and the Mound and all these other little things that are out there, and a pretty big area and an excuse to throw in extra stuff. Um, Village of Hamlet is a pretty fertile ground if you wanted to play around in that village for a while. A DM could get creative with all the stuff going on there as well. So simple dungeons, monster lairs, um, wild animals. Um, don't forget things like fetch quests. I mean, I know that's kind of a modern video game-ish term, but the fact of the matter is that having to get an item from point A to point B or go get an item and bring it back is a good excuse to pad out, and not in a bad way, pad out, but in a positive way, pad out your adventure to allow it for to be more characterful and have more going on for the players to really sink their teeth into. Um, yeah, I mean, Mages nails it right here. So, major settings, setting based scenarios. Yeah, um, and and if you're familiar with his campaign he's doing for OSE with the with Keep on the Borderlands, he's incorporating other adventures that are being accessed from that was weird inflection accessed from the Keep on the Borderlands. So Castle Caldwell's been in there. He threw in a little encounter that I had wrote and sort of he's woven that into his world. There's the Beneath the Keep scenario, which is a cool fifth edition scenario. I believe that was he retrofitted back to BX, which is cool, or OSE in this case. Um, yeah, this is a good one too. Uh, Reconnaissance can be a good one. Go to this point and find out what's going on. It's also the nice thing about a reconnaissance mission is this is a chance to really show players um, a sense of consequence and that your actions matter because when they go to reconnoiter whatever it is they're sent out to do, they then are going to be faced with, do we come back and report this information or do we be the hero or do we be I can't English this morning, sorry guys. But do we play the heroes and try to take it on ourselves? In which case they might get their butts handed to them, or maybe because maybe that what the reconnaissance is revealing isn't supposed to be what they're supposed to be taking on at the time. It's a good way to teach them restraint. Um, Something like a fetch quest can be many things. That thing you're sent to retrieve may turn out to be not so easily given. And so you might have to take it or resort to other means, or the players may have to, once they get there, do some talking and some finagling. And maybe we do some reaction rolls or whatever to see if they can manage to procure the thing to bring it back, especially if it's not like a preset, like, oh, old man Wiggins has a pig waiting for me. I need you to go fetch it. No, honestly, that can be a great adventure and for a low level game. My current fifth edition game started at 0 level. We actually worked their way up from 0 level, and the first 2 adventures were go fetch a load of water from this spring that grows near that flows near the village. That the village makes a particularly well-known ale out of. And when they got there, they found that the spring had been felled by a boggle. If you're familiar with D&D monsters, the boggles, they're these fae that have a kind of a gross slime that they exude. And so he had polluted the spring with his gross slime. And so the party had to figure out a way to get him to vacate the spring so they could get the water that they needed. It was a role playing encounter. They could have fought the boggle and maybe won, probably not. I mean, it's a boggle, so it would have probably just disappeared. Um, that encounter, though, that adventure led to them running into some goblins and having a role playing encounter with the goblins that kind of set the tone for the goblins in the world, even though they didn't actually fight them. Well, they did fight a couple. They managed to fight 2 goblins and kill them because the goblins, as they were camping, they saw that a couple of goblins were trying to kidnap the boggle. Um, but again, that's just an example of a low-level campaign that's got a little bit more meat on its bones that started as a fetch quest. Um, then there was another scenario where they had to take something to a village. And this is the other thing, the reason for the adventure does not have to be the adventure. So that's another thing to really remember. So the next example I'm going to use is that they had to go to a village to take something from their village to another village. I think it was an herbal remedy or something like that being sent by the herbalist in town. And when they got there, one of the farmer's prized goats had wandered off, and so the delivery quest was really just the MacGuffin to get them going towards the real quest, which was finding this goat. And then there was another layer because finding the goat later on ended up having been the trigger for this whole series of events where an ancient Druun lord spirit had possessed the goat and then now had possessed somebody in the village, and an army of the Druun were rising from the barrow where the goat had been found, and there was a big deal. This went on as sort of a little mini campaign arc, but it started with get the farmer's goat. um, Also, anecdotally, that goat almost killed one of the party members. Not a giant goat and not a goat with any special powers, but just a goat, because it beat the shit out of out of the sorcerer in the party. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are simple examples of village-based low-level adventures. There are lots of other ways you can do it too. And some of that comes down to how you start your campaign. It's kind of tied in with are you meeting in the inn, or are you residents of the village? Are you all slaves on the same galley and you have to start from there? Are you all down and outers? Are you all bandits? I mean, how and why the players and their characters are together at the start of the game can inform the sorts of adventures you go on. I mean, there are perfectly reasonable low-level adventures you could come up with that tie into some of the tropes of D&D, but flip it around. For example, a lot of D&D tropes for low-level adventures are, oh, go take care of the bandits that are plaguing the road into town. Well, what if the players join the bandits and become the part of the plague on the road? Because not all adventurers are out for good and law, and some adventurers are just out for treasure and fortune. A lot of them are down and outers. So maybe their first couple of adventures are actually trying to take on merchants. Um, Maybe your players at low levels get recruited by a higher level adventuring NPC and are effectively hirelings. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's we raised goats as a kid, Grumpy, and we had one named Gotobix who was a ninja goat, and unfortunately, we never managed to get him dehorned, so he had a full set of nice curled back horns. And as a kid, my sister and her dumb friends thought it was funny to push on his head and get him to butt because, oh, it was so cute. And so as an adult goat with a full set of horns, he liked to butt people. And so because goats' feet are padded, they don't make a lot of noise. So going out to the car on the farm, all you would get would be clippity clippity, and then a big smash to the back of your shoulder, or the small of your back, or whatever, wherever he managed to hit you. And that's because he would sneak up, and then the only sound you would get is those last couple little steps as he was rearing up, getting ready to bash you. But at least he battle cried and went meh. So we started having to keep a 2x4 by the back door to like fend off the damn goat. Um, but yeah, farm life. Uh, but yeah, so I think when you're creating the low level adventures, the big thing to keep in mind is that, first of all, do not think of them as a chore that you have to get through to get to the real adventure. Um, those low level adventures are a perfect time as a GM to start establishing your setting through the character's interactions with the world, which don't necessarily have to, and really shouldn't, come down to combat all the time. Some combat is, I think, important and worthwhile. It's a good way in a lot of editions and a lot of games. It's how they get their experience, but also it does set the tone that the world is not just a cakewalk of role playing and happy, handshakes and all of that. Not all role playing has to be positive. Role playing can be obstructive. It can be antagonistic. The you know when they're trying to go do that fetch quest and they get to the next town over, if the town guard doesn't want to let them in, they either have to figure out a way to get him to let them in, sneak in, or camp outside of town till morning and it opens up again or something. It is you know very important to keep that balance, but I think the main thing to remember is to make them interesting as you can. Let's see. That's true. Well, I don't think he was a high level hero. I think he was. Let's see, was that? I'm trying to remember if that was early in his career or not, because he could have just been a really good stats hero. But he's also a demigod, so it cheats. So, all right. So let's take an example real quick. The rats in the cellar. So the rats in the cellar is a it's a trope encounter for those low level things. So the rats in the cellar by itself can be really boring. It's essentially just going down and clobbering rats. I think honestly, the rats in the cellar may even come from a video game reference as opposed to an actual tabletop reference. But I think it's like one of the early like Pool of Radiance or Curse of the Azure Bonds kind of encounters or something. Maybe a Baldur's Gate reference. I can't remember. They all blur together. um, but it doesn't have to be though. So you could, as a DM, turn that into something worthwhile. So the rats are in the cellar. The merchant needs the rats out of his cellar. Why does he need the rats out of the cellar? At the most basic version of the adventure, it's because they're eating his supplies and they're causing problems. Well, maybe the merchant has something hidden in that cellar. Maybe through that encounter, the players learn that the merchant is involved in something else. Is there stolen goods down there? Is there a weird room with shackles in it? Is there a entrance to a tunnel that goes into the city? Um, you know, are the rats branded with something, or are they marked? Is there a strange chalked circle on the floor of the merchant's basement? I mean, all these things can be thrown in to expand on that and turn it into either kind of a seed for a future adventure, or turn that early encounter into the start of a campaign. Um, so, I mean, that's just an example right there. Maybe, maybe the merchant is evil and he sends the players down there expecting them to die by the rats because he needs to because he's trying to feed the rats to do something with the rats. Maybe he's training the rats to crave man flesh so he can then now set them out on the city and terrorize the people of the town with man-eating rats, and then he can sell them the remedy by a poison that he has. He just happens to have that poison, that cure. There's a lot of ways you can go with that. And the important thing is to think of those simple encounters that you can then grow out. Bandits, the ubiquitous bandits on the road to town, don't necessarily have to be bad guys. Maybe they're robbing people with good cause. Maybe they're robbing fat merchants who have been taking advantage of the villagers. Maybe they're robbing king's men because of something that the local lord is doing. Maybe they are robbing because they have been displaced from their lands a village over. Um, you know, your low level encounters can certainly have meat on their bones. Um, One encounter that I often throw in to my campaigns at low levels is a chance encounter with either a merchant or like a low level cleric of an order on the road. Almost every campaign I manage to work this in at the low levels, and it's a way to establish a contact in the world for my party. Um, Either a friendly merchant who needs a task done, the wheel on his wagon is broken, or goblins took his goods, or bandits robbed him, um, or the monk, who is in danger, or you know who in one in one scenario he was just in a pond naked and somebody had stolen all of his stuff, and he's like, please do me a favor and help me out. um uh well, yeah, you can never escape your chores. So yeah, the low level adventure thing is, I think, one of those things that's a pretty basic answer. um and it doesn't require a ton of of work to get it to work, but I think a lot of people overlook it. um I'm going to throw out an invite if anybody wants to come on and talk about this, because we are only 22 minutes into the stream. um and I believe that this is something that would benefit from some conversation with other GMs and stuff. So I'm going to throw this out here in the notes, or not the notes, the comments. And if you would like to come on, by all means do, and we can chat it up. Let's see, other low level things that I like to do. I do like to throw in. Let me change tack here for a second. So one of the other impressions of low level encounters that is out there is that low level encounters don't let you do much in the way of monsters. I also think this is false. There are so many monsters in D&D now that I believe that you could easily do any sort of low level monsters. Oh, look, and here's GM Cody.
Yo,
Good
what's
morning,
up?
sir. No camera today, huh?
No camera.
That's all right. It's not a requirement.
No,
Ah,
it's too lazy of a Sunday for a camera.
I understand. Um,
Hey, happy birthday, dude.
oh yeah, thank you. It's funny. I got to sleep in this morning. And I was forced to take the day off from work. Actually, was looking to work overtime today because I don't usually do much for my birthday, and the work's like, no, it's Labor Day, you have to take the day off. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that
But
was pretty much me. I actually wanted to work. they just wouldn't let me work. So hey, whatever.
And I thought I was going to be working yesterday. I was going to be working overtime, and then some things changed around the house. I'm like, you know what? I can afford to take a day off now, and I'm going to take my full weekend, 3 days in a row. But yeah, so I slept in this morning, and then ended up waking up to like, oh, your brother wants to take you out for your birthday, and our niece is coming over, and you got an hour to your stream. I'm like, ah.
Yeah,
And
mine was the opposite. I tried to sleep in, and I still got up at like 6 o'clock this morning. So
I was awake and trying to sleep. And oh, it looks like we got Mage's Musings joining us as well.
oh, right
Hello,
on.
sir.
Hello.
What's up, Sean?
Come on, you got to do it in the puppet voice.
Hello.
So, how you doing, man? Oh, it's your pupper. I don't think I've
It's
ever
the
seen your
pupper.
dog.
It's not mine. I'm dog sitting
Oh,
while I'm working remote.
it's yours while you have it.
Well, mine while I have it. Yeah, I got to take her out. She's getting a little excitable, but I think I can come on for a bit. Wish you a happy birthday.
I
Proper.
appreciate it. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm officially 52. I know I've been saying 52 for a while, but it's kind of like just a rounding up. But all right, so low level adventures. I know both you guys are DM GMs, and so you probably have a lot of experience running low level stuff. What's some things that you like to do with those low level adventures, or to keep in mind when trying to craft those low level encounters and adventures?
Who crafts? I just throw them in a wilderness and see what the chart comes up.
Well, that is
Yeah.
true.
But I will say, if I'm running D&D, typically I don't always balance the encounters for a low-level party. I like having the danger there for a low-level party. Usually when I start a D&D game, I like running sandbox games, and I'll present a bunch of rumors and options, wherever they are, whether they go into a big city or little town or village, or whether they start in that village. And they get to pick and choose where they want to go, and they have to make decisions. Hey, there's a farmer over there. He's having trouble with this giant chicken monster or whatever. Oh, there's these, whatever. There's the bandits or the rats in the cellar, and they have to make decisions whether they want to go on, go do that or not. And sometimes, they go on these adventures and they get a little above their head.
Oh yeah.
And I like that danger, and the players seem to like that danger too. It's challenging for them, and sometimes they still succeed, even if it is a little bit above their head.
Yeah, I don't tend to form encounters to a specific level either. I like a certain level of verisimilitude in my world, so that does mean there are things going on out there that may be above your pay grade. But I feel like when you're putting those things together initially, whether it's a random chart that you're creating or the game designers created, they do have a variety of things in there. And I think that there's this weird perception that 1d4 rats is a boring encounter and it means nothing. And I'm going to use the rat encounter a lot because it's a well-known
Sure.
trope, or the bandits, and those are like, oh, bandits, roll my eyes, but it doesn't have to be. And that's the thing. I think those and those encounters can be worked into something more entertaining, more interesting, even if they are random, because the random tables are great. I mean, I remember having a low-level party run into a green dragon in the forest, and what the hell are they going to do about that?
Right. Well, no, you're absolutely right. Like one good example I have of that is a low-level party. I use the random encounter charts a lot from like the Judges Guild books.
Oh yeah,
sometimes
such good stuff.
And they would just give you these short, sweet little excerpts like dragon nest, eggs inside. It'd be very short and brief. So the low-level party was walking through the wilderness and they encountered something. So I just rolled randomly because I didn't have any ideas, and it was a white dragon, a full adult white dragon. And I was like, okay, they can definitely not handle this. But I was like, oh, wait a minute, this might be kind of cool. So what I did was, it was an adult white dragon, but it was dead, and it was in a what do you call it? I can't think of it, like a canyon, right? They were traveling through a canyon, so they came upon a dragon's nest, but the dragon had already been slain. But there was a dragon hatchling. They found a dragon egg. They took it with them, and the dragon hatched. And then it caused all kinds of problems, right? Because they were like, oh, cool, we got a dragon. Yeah, you got a dragon, but now you have to, so it became this whole other like side thing where they had to, tame this baby white dragon and make it like a tame thing or whatever. But you're absolutely right. You can take a simple encounter or a random encounter and turn it into something else, right?
Yeah. Sean?
I think your opportunities as well at those low levels to enforce in players that they can talk to creatures are about how many players will see goblins and immediately leap in and sword swinging and wonder why they're getting killed. Not all creatures fight to the death. Some creatures will want to parlay. Goblins might want to trade, for instance. Orcs might want to trade. You got your racial hatreds that you want to consider. Goblins, for instance, will attack dwarves on sight. But for the most part, a human group can parlay with orcs and whatnot. And you want to get the habit of players thinking we don't have to fight everything, especially at those low levels.
Oh yeah. I know in one instance, I've heard one story. This is just a story that was related to me in one of the rat encounters. The players decided to try and capture the rats so they could train them. like,
right.
I'm like, okay, you've got rats. Well, they're like, and I think it was a party where somebody had actually in real life had pet rats, which are amazing pets, right? And so they're very intelligent creatures. So if you can train them, then you've got some useful little hooligans on your hands to help you out in your adventuring.
That's what the animal friendship spell is for.
Yep. Or a DM who's going to say, all right, you're going to have to spend X amount of time with X amount of gold pieces trying to train these rats. But again, that's an opportunity that comes out of a simple encounter. If your players go, I want to catch them and try and train them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless there's something making those rats behave other than actual natural creatures, then why not? And even if they are, say, ensorcelled or something like that, well, maybe they can have that spell lifted from them, depending on who the party knows. I mean, obviously at low levels, they're not going to be able to do that. But
thank you, adventurers, for freeing us. And now we will swarm you and kill you.
That would throw. Actually, it's funny is that in my brother's campaign that he's running, the one that I actually had to bow out of, the party has managed to start a revolution amongst the local rat population to where they're actually forming a society, because somehow they managed to awaken a bunch of rats in the game. And so they have this group of rats that live in a pumpkin, like this giant pumpkin, because they're in the Feywild too, part of this too. And so they have this whole, it's because the party is full of academics, like the players, and one of the guys like basically starting this whole like socialist revolution amongst the rats. Like the rats that live at the top of the pumpkin are living off your labor. And it was hilarious. So like before I had bowed out of that game, my wizard was taking one of the rats back to his master's tower to learn spells. So it's like it's gonna create a rat wizard. But and all of that was just spontaneous player fun, Yes. Axie.
Rats are unionizing.
Also, welcome. I don't recognize this name being in the comments before, so welcome to the stream. Welcome to Elfbait, and then also RW Bishop snuck in here as well. All right, mouse guard ish, kind of, yeah. But I think those are examples of how those adventures, and I know that Sean likes to use the random encounters, and Cody, you've said that you like to use the random encounters too.
Yeah.
And one thing that I believe I've heard both of you relate in various streams and stuff is that, and one thing I've always taken to heart as well, rolling an encounter doesn't mean it just shows up in front of you and it just spawns in front of you, video game style, ready to fight. That green dragon encounter could be seeing it fly overhead.
Right. Yeah.
Or, and in one adventure, I rolled a dragon encounter, and I just had the party find the aftermath of the dragon. There was a dead knight. There was a half-eaten horse. There was, and in another campaign, they came over a hill and the whole field was full of just like half-munched sheep.
Mhm.
and some of them had scorch marks on them that wasn't fire, because there's a blue dragon in the area, and he had been like lightning roasting uh the sheep, and then taking bites. But again, those encounters are world building, and it paints a picture for the party that there is a dragon in the area. um but I think it's funny is that B2, I think, tried to educate players pretty well in that you don't have to fight all the monsters. I think it
Yeah,
Right.
really does a
eventually
good
it's
job.
suicide. Yeah.
And I already told this story on Bear Stream, but I've ran Keep on the Borderlands multiple times. So I love that module. It's a fun start to a campaign. But in one of the times I ran a party through Keep on the Borderlands, it was all new players. The party took some of the gold that they had collected or earned and bribed one of the factions, like the orcs or whatever, to go root out the goblin section. So they had bribed them, or they captured one of their leaders or whatnot. So that, that's a good example of, the party was like, okay, we can't take all these guys. Let's parlay. And they made a deal with them. And they were like, hey, we can offer you some gold. There's some goblins over here who you already hate, and it can be more living space for you. And hey, they got more treasure over there. And so they basically hired the orcs as mercenaries to do their dirty work, So, that's a good example of you don't always have to fight things, right?
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
in one of Mage's recent review caps, he had goblins join in with the party or something like that, didn't you? In
The group was negotiating with the kobolds
Oh yeah.
to the kobolds wanted the goblins wiped out, and then they went and started talking to the goblins after fighting, of course, and the goblins had a task for them. So because the goblins wanted to get rid of the hobgoblins, they're evil tribes. Even if they're under a loose alliance, they've still got their own plots. Most people in Caves of Chaos was go into the cave and start fighting whatever's there, and then get overwhelmed. This is
Yeah.
what I was saying. You can talk to the creatures, which can be interesting.
Oh yeah. And I think that's where the real juice in the game comes from. And if you watch any of those rare pieces of footage of people playing old school D&D, like like the old TV spots and stuff, when it managed to actually get some mainstream media, you'll see that. I want to parlay with the goblins. The parlay was the word du jour back then. I remember, like, when I was a kid, like, ooh, what's this word? This fancy word that means
Mhm.
talk to you. We actually have a question here from Axie. Um, do you think that there's a moment in DM's career where they go from having random encounters unconnected to using random encounters to formulate connections instead of being unconnected?
I think
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, I also think that could happen right from the beginning too.
Hmm.
Um, I'm gonna use Sean as an example here, because his review caps are just fertile ground for examples of how to run a good campaign. And I'm you know the cockatrice thing, not a hugely connected plot thread, but the fact that you had a cockatrice randomly rolled, and then an actual planned cockatrice encounter, and then like another cockatrice later on.
Yeah, the first one was a part of the Beneath the Keep module.
Yeah.
It's actually printed in there. It's a clipped cockatrice in a cage, and then yeah, later, shortly thereafter, one came up completely randomly. And it's like, well, then there's the connection, right? The guy had a clipped one because there's some in the region, and then you build from there, and it worked out.
And you can formulate those routine random encounters into something bigger. That gives a GM a nice in route to creating a set encounter or
Yeah,
adventure without
once
and then the players aren't going to feel like it's cheesy, like, oh, suddenly there's goblins.
yeah, once the after the Beneath the Keep encounter, where it was just a planned cockatrice, I had no other plans to put anything in. But then when one turned up randomly, when the characters in the wilderness, I'm like, okay, well that fits. Now I'll place a cockatrice nest on the map, and it is now there to be discovered.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think hopefully that is what Axia is talking about. But I think that's a good way to do it. I don't think you have to wait for a particular point in the party's career to start doing that.
No.
I would say that if you keep rolling that green dragon, to use another example, and it shows up several times just by pure randomness, well, clearly there's a freaking green dragon in the area. I mean, the
Well,
first time it shows up, it's in the area.
Yeah. Well, I've got a red dragon in the air. There was one from the beginning. I had always planned on there being one, and twice now it has been encountered randomly.
Yeah. And that's the other thing.
So
I mean, that's a good point. Your random encounters can simply be reinforcements of what you already
of
have
what
in
you've
the adventure.
planned, yeah, you can
Like
cater your lists. Yeah.
if you're doing B2 and goblins come up randomly, they're probably a scouting force um
From the
the Caves
caves.
of
Yeah.
Chaos. Yeah. Or are they a rival band, a rival group of goblins scouting the area to maybe move in, and could they be allies? You could take that a number of different ways. What do you think on this topic, Cody? As far as waiting to a certain point to start connecting random encounters?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it just makes sense to have a random encounter. If they're traveling through the woods and they encounter a band of elves, well, that probably makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then I try to make some kind of connection to make it make sense. Or I might not use that encounter. I don't always, if I roll up, whatever, a band of centaurs and doesn't really make any sense for the area or what's going on, sometimes I don't use that. But maybe maybe it'll just inspire me to give me a different idea or whatnot. But yeah, I definitely think, Axie was saying, is there a moment in a DM's career where they just stopped using random, unconnected, random encounters? For sure. There definitely was for me. I mean, when I was a kid, I just tried to play the game by the book. I just tried to extrapolate what I could find. I didn't have YouTube like the rest of us, or
Kids these
any,
days.
well, I didn't have
Use-
any example, right? I just had to
yeah.
do it. So I just had to figure it out. And then once I saw other people playing the game, I could be like, oh, okay, that's how they do it, and
Yeah.
so every DM evolves, and that's a whole nother topic of discussion. But we all evolve as DMs, and I still am. I'm certain all of us are.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I ever had a eureka moment myself, because I'm sort of a self-taught DM. I've been DMing since the beginning. My very first experience with the game was as a DM, and I have played in my early years. I played a lot, um, uh, but later into my life, as I went along, I started DMing more and more, at least D&D,
Yeah.
and then so yeah, I've had a lot of time to formulate my style, and I don't think it was ever intentional at all. So
Right.
and I'm on record as having a lot of input and experience with Dragon magazine articles, which really helped, because
Yeah.
you would
Mhm.
have that article on ways to improve your encounters, and you read it and you put it aside, but it imprints on your brain, and you pick out a little bit, and it works its way in. So I don't know if I had a eureka moment, or if it just, I'm also a natural storyteller,
Yeah.
and so for me, it's just coming up with those connections is so easy. Like you mentioned, your centaurs. I don't think there's any random encounter I could roll where I couldn't come up with a reason for them to be there, and you
So to
probably
be
could
there,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
But and those reasons build the world. Um, and often a weird encounter that I didn't plan for, like will like your cockatrice again, will like end up creating a note on on a map. If the characters are traveling and somehow randomly on the road they encounter a ghost, what the hell's a ghost doing on a road? And
Mhm.
so then you've got to decide, where'd the ghost come from? And next thing you know, you've got like a barrow somewhere, or maybe down in a gully there's an old carriage that crashed there with the desiccated
Mhm.
body of an ancient princess.
Somebody
In
was murdered by a highwayman, or yeah.
Exactly. Are you at a crossroads, and there's a dead man buried there? Though in my particular example, where we had a random ghost encounter, they were traveling through this elven forest, and it wasn't a ghost. It was a particular form of elven undead I have for my campaign world. Um, and when they woke up in the morning, they realized they had camped near these kind of elven standing stones that they hadn't noticed because the forest is so overgrown and magical and stuff like that. Hey, John is here, the old geek.
Hello, John.
But yeah, so in that case, then I marked down on the map that here are those standing stones. So if they ever went past, they'd have to keep in mind. And also, the players are like, can we note this down and remember where this is? Because because it was a really bad encounter. The guy who was awake and on watch ended up pretty much getting charmed by this undead and was in the process of being killed by the ghost spirit elf thing, with the rest of the party being asleep. It wasn't like, oh, that could have gone so bad. They would have woke up or not woke up, and he would have been dead. But
I would say that's a big part of my DM style. I think Mage is the same way. I don't know if you are, Eli, but I tend to just make shit up as it happens. I have some planned ideas, and then I just let the players, inspire me, and also let, like we were talking about, random encounter charts or whatever, just kind of, or random events or something somebody talks about at the table or what happened, and I just let it emerge as it's happening, right?
Oh yeah,
and that's so.
I am a very stream of consciousness, off the cuff GM.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about the dog barking. If anybody can hear it, my niece is showing up, so he is excited. But I've even challenged myself to run entire sessions without having even the slightest prep, like as an exercise. Just
I've done it all the time.
yeah, I mean on purpose. Even a lot of times you do it just because you're like, you get caught flat-footed. But there are times where I'm like, I need to exercise my GM muscles, right?
Flex
I'm
that
like,
muscle, yeah.
I'm gonna go in and like nothing. Or sometimes, like I love just, I think we're kind of off the topic of low-level adventures because
Yeah, a little bit.
there's not a lot to be said. I mean, honestly, I think they don't have to be stale. They don't have to be boring. They can lead into bigger things. They can be fun. They can be, I think, adding more role play and skill challenges depending on the system that you're using. I mean, even in older school D&D, there are ways to do skill challenges, even though there's not necessarily a system for them, right? Mm-hmm. The player's skill can pad those out and spice them up a lot. But yeah, I think when you're random encounters is a good way to establish your world and help build your world. For a GM, especially, like a lot of people like, I'm not good at world building. Okay, don't be. Let the dice build the world for you. Build your village, and then after that, pad it out through random encounters. And random encounter tables can be non-random. You can use them to just generate ideas.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
That's kind of what we were talking about, right? I'll also say you had a good point there earlier when we were talking about like all the points of designing low-level adventures is taking simple ideas and just extrapolating on that, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to have some crazy kooky fucking a lot of DMs, new DMs especially, get hung up on this idea that you're going to have the super intricate web of ideas to make a great adventure, and you really don't. You can just have a really simple idea and just twist it just a little bit, and your players, as long as you can run the game well and get them involved, then it's going to be a great game and it's going to be a great adventure.
Yeah. I think it's important to know where the line is when letting your players guide things. Obviously, you might have some players who want to get kind of cuckoo pants with your game. You kind of got to shut that down sometimes, but I don't run into that too often because I don't play with a lot of strangers. So most of my gaming has been played with common gamers.
To answer Axie's question, I hate when they frame low-level adventures as major epics. You're setting yourself up for failure, because what'll happen is you're going to want to see the story through. In order to see it through, you've got to fudge rolls, because low-level characters aren't necessarily capable of completing an epic quest. Usually epic quests are designed to be, railroads. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but I can't, because I don't usually use those kinds of stories. Fifth Ed, Dragonlance. There's a very good one. The first Dragonlance module is meant to be epic. Fifth Ed does that a lot. The major Fifth Ed modules are meant to be campaigns, really, but They're, you look at the Tyranny of Dragons, they've created this
They generally
whole,
go like level 1 to 10 or 15, most of
yeah,
them.
and they expect you to level characters up on the fly. You're assuming you're not using any training rules. I mean, there aren't any for fifth ed,
Yeah.
but things like that, it's like, all right, well, let characters ruminate in their low levels. Let characters have their low level lives so they can experience it rather than throwing them into the big story. You can tease the story if you've got something bigger planned, but I hate it when modules expect and players then come to expect the delivery of an epic story, something cinematic.
Yeah, I feel like this is where the module system of Days of Old was really useful, in that there were low level adventures which could get the characters to those levels where they could then pick up a quest. And a lot of those higher level adventures were like, a king has approached you to do the such and such, or you meet a woman on the road and she asks you to do the thing. I think that's letting your players get to that point and then having the world engage them on those quests is the better way to do it. I guess you could almost call it sort of, it's not a great example, but it is an example of The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is still a pretty damn epic quest. I mean, ultimately they deal with the dragon, right? But
Right.
although they don't slay the dragon, an NPC does. so, um, that's
Or
bad adventure
Bard could
design
be
if
a
you think about it.
later edition, PC edition, a later PC edition. He's the
That's
guy
true.
who showed up late. His girlfriend left him, and so he had to rejoin the
I'm
campaign.
free to play. I'm free to game now. But yeah, letting your players build those levels up before they kick off on those big quests, I think is the better way to go. I think
Especially for
ultimately,
old school games, yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
5e, you're so bulletproof that you can do it. Yeah. I mean, it's 5e, you can engage on that epic quest from the beginning because you're very unlikely to die. Trust me, my campaign's in its third year now, and I have yet to have one PC die.
I've got a character graveyard of my 5e games, so
I don't understand how, because
I
my
don't fudge. I let the dice roll where they will, and
I don't fudge either. In fact, I'm actually completely transparent because we're playing on D&D Beyond, and I'm using the die roller there. And
now
I've got
the other difference is I think you're playing rules as written, where I've got a bunch of house rules to
that
curb
is
things
also
a
true.
little.
I'm doing
So.
pretty much raw because I don't have time to deal with house rules with this group. Not to mention I have a player in the group who's not overly he wants to play 5e, and so as such he wants 5e, which is fine. He's the guy who's also said, like, if we play anything else, he'll just sit out till we come back to 5e again. Not that he's not trying to be obtrusive or anything like that. He's not interested. So I'm kind of
I think it.
I am
Yeah,
not nice. I am just not bad.
I think when I look at the deaths in my 5e game, though, they would have been deaths in a normal game. Like there were death save failures. I haven't altered the death save mechanics, so
And I have not done that either. And what surprises me and what really gets me is that, and where I really realized that either my party was more powerful than they should be, or the 5e is, and I doubt it's they're more powerful than they should be because they keep forgetting all the stuff they have. It was it was that when they survived 3 back to back, no time for a rest, deadly level encounters, like bam, 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 in 3 different waves with no time to rest between. And they were really hard pressed for resources after that, but they managed to make it through. And so yeah, I'm like, oh man, it's just so hard. I've said it before, and I don't want this to turn into 5e bashing too much, but the biggest problem I have with 5e is I feel like I have to actively work against my players rather than the game just providing a challenge in and of itself. Like I have to really try to make it challenging, which then sort of feeds into that adversarial DM mentality, which I don't want to have, I
I think it's probably true of by the book 5e. I
Yeah.
just run my 5e game the way I run my ordinary game, and nobody notices the difference other than the rules that we use.
Well, that's cool. I have tried to engage my 5e players. I think I mentioned the one campaign that I ran actually at the start of this campaign when it was a very different player group because a lot of them moved on. I had a list of 10 different things from the DMG that I wanted to integrate into the game.
Didn't they rebel or something?
One of them got approved. I had a list. I'm like, check off the ones. I had them all fill out this little form. Like, check off the ones that you're interested in using, yes or no. And only one of them was unanimously a yes. I'm like, but anyways, that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about encounters. And so, yeah, let's see. A neutral position is fine. Well, yeah, I know. So Cal, and welcome. I try to be neutral, but I will say where I diverge personally from sort of the classic old school mentality is I am a story guy. I do like stories in my games. I don't fudge rules for the sake of stories, but I often probably load a little bit more story into my games than I do just random emergent play.
Well, the emergent becomes the story, and you can I don't mind finessing things and connections that come up, like we talked about the cockatrice encounter, that was not planned, but that became part of the story, and then characters went out and hunted it, and that is now the story, the legend of these guys who went out, killed a cockatrice. The something that's going on, of course, the Caves of Chaos are building. Like, I don't know if you watched the earlier adventure where they went to assault on the Assault on Raven's Ruin module. The hobgoblins ended up leaving, right? Because the characters kept going back and harassing. I was killing people. Hobgoblins. I rolled their morale. The hobgoblins said, "Nope. Eventually, we're going to lose. We're better off leaving now." So I added the hobgoblin roster from that module to the Caves of Chaos module. Right.
Yeah.
And that led to what's going on. The players know this. I'm not spoiling anything, but the hobgoblin has the scepter of Alona, which they were failed to recover on Assault of Raven's Ruin, and that has given them a position of status. So now that has influenced how things have gone on in the caves. That story is emerged, but it's still all connected.
And then there's this. You get to face 12 hobgoblins because that's what I just got painted. So Cody, story or emergent or a combination thereof?
Combination of two, but you got to remember I'm in that weird category of gamer, right? I grew up I'm in this weird place where I grew up in the 90s, but I also was exposed to all this old school D&D very early on too.
Yeah, you're kind of a typical 90s kid in that you got all the benefits of having the old 80s around you.
Yeah. Right. But I grew up with guys that were older. I also got exposed to like first edition AD&D when I was really young, and same with BX D&D. That was actually the first version of D&D I bought because it was cheap. I couldn't afford the AD&D second edition books, but I could afford the BX box set, which at the time was like $5 at the game store. So that's the version I first personally got and played. But at the same time, I was also exposed to, things like Vampire the Masquerade and Dragonlance and Dark Sun and all these very 90s storytelling ideas. So my games are kind of a combination of both. I have story in there, but it's also emergent, so I don't force people into stories, in my D&D games, especially. I don't force people into stories, period. If they don't want to go do that thing, they aren't enticed by that hook, well, what do you want to do is my next question, and they tell me, and then I will start another story based on what they're telling me, right? And a story emerges. So it's a combination of both. I will also say, somebody was mentioning, like we were talking about, I know we're kind of past the subject, is the epic quest kind of thing. I have done this successfully in low level adventures, but usually what I do is just it's just a hint of the epic quest that they could go do later. They might find an item, or they, maybe some bad guys raid the village and they're looking for something or whatever. And it's just a hint to an epic quest that they could do if they wanted to. or it might be an epic quest that emerges later on. They're like, oh, we found this item in the mines, and this creepy cult, took over the mine and was looking for it, and they found it and uncovered it. We don't know what it does. We got to find somebody that can tell us what it does. Well, it's going to be several levels before they get to that point, right? So you can do that epic quest idea at a low level, but it's got to be more of a hint, I think, more than just, thrust them into the,
I have always wanted to pull a Tolkien and put and drop an artifact relic in the laps of like my first level party and see like what happens into the campaign. Like, all right, well, here's the hand of Vecna. All right, what are you gonna do? Here's the hammer of thunderbolts or whatever it is.
Well, I've done that before, but they just don't know what it is.
Lords. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like it's like and you can even play it off like, okay, because it's an artifact relic in your low level, you can use the base bonuses for it. Actually, that Book of Wondrous Weapons that I was sharing with you earlier the week, Cody, is full of amazing magic weapons. It's the old Judges Guild book, and each one has a backstory with it. So they're all pre-done magic weapons with intelligences and special abilities, and it's an old school book, and it is available as a reprint on the Judges Guild for I think $20.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, so, I'm definitely gonna have to pick that up.
Yeah, I ordered a classic version of it. I found a classic version, but then I ordered a reprint so I could use it at the table. But I have fragments of mine that I acquired in 4th grade, but it's missing about 12 pages because the outer pages came off because it was just like a almost newsprint staple bound book. So the cover and all. So I don't have the D&D conversion rules because it's written in whatever Judges Guild's in homebrew system was back in the day. That was we're not actually publishing for D&D, but yes, we are system.
Right.
Then they have conversion rules. It's a great book. And I'm trying to find out if they do one for magic items. Speaking of magic items, but there are some swords and stuff in there each one is illustrated too. So everyone's got a picture, and it's an amazing book. But yeah, artifacts, and starting that epic quest, I think you can start the players on an epic quest without them knowing it too, because sometimes it's just the background stuff. Okay, let's say you're playing a village-based campaign where they are all home-based. They start out doing simple little fetch quests around town. Later on in the game, there's an encounter with like some soldiers, and then they find out that on the edges of the kingdom there is war is stirring or something. You can build that even through emergent encounter, like random encounters. Like if you keep rolling like a soldier encounter, well, maybe there is a war afoot. The king's men are moving around. Or if you start rolling up large bands of humanoids, well, Isengard is calling, right?
I kind of a good example. I've done this a few times, like I said, but one good example recently, and it was actually one of my longest running campaigns, is the players rescue. It was a generic adventure. They went and rescued a princess. Actually, she didn't need rescuing. She went away because she fell in love with this roguish dude off on these pirate isles. But they went there, they found her, they took her against her will basically because she didn't want to go. Brought her back to the queen, and the queen gifted the players basically a duchy. But it was on like the edge of these wilderlands that were part of her province, but it was like taken over by orcs, and there was all these rogue dukes and all this stuff, and they didn't know that when they got there. So they get there and they're like, okay, technically we have this duchy and this keep now in this little village, and we're like level 2, but now we got to like somehow actually secure this place. And that was kind of her whole plan all along, right? They were just disposable, and she was like, well, maybe they can take care of it, nobody else has. Here you go, you can have this. And that became a whole campaign that lasted quite a long time. And it became even more epic from there, because all of a sudden they're getting involved in political intrigue, because all these different factions are like, hey, what if you join with us, join our country, and blah, blah, blah. And, there were wars, and There were all kinds of things. So
That's
it
cool.
was.
I remember one bit of player shenanigans that my friend and myself engaged in somebody else's campaign had far-reaching ramifications for that campaign. In that we went into a town, and then it was bad because it was like right after Unearthed Arcana came out, and so cantrips were a thing. So we were playing around with cantrips and low-level magic spells and stuff. And so we had used a bunch of those spells to convince this innkeeper that a werewolf was hassling his inn through minor illusions and sounds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we would take care of it. And, it was the classic, Jack the Giant Killer kind of thing, pretending there's, I'm going to go get paid. Well, the DM decided that after our characters left that town, that the actual werewolf in the area got news that there was another werewolf on his turf and came looking for it, and actually managed to attack somebody in that village. And when we came through it the next time, the entire village was werewolves. The DM's like, all right, it's all werewolves now. Like, oh, and we're like, oh, well, that's all our fault. My bad. But no, so player shenanigans can definitely inform your world too. I mean,
well, that's great for them too, because then they see they're having an impact. They're not just playing the pre-planned beats that you've laid out, and nothing has any meaning. They can go back and revisit something they did or didn't do and see the effect.
Yeah, I've mentioned it before in a couple of streams, but I had the thief in one of my second edition parties who kept doing the most blatant thiefy things, like stealing. This is the guy who stole the robes and holy symbol and all the vestments of a. Remember how I mentioned I like to have the cleric, who's bathing off the side of the road as a random encounter kind of thing earlier in the stream. Well, they met that guy in this stream in this particular campaign, except for in this case, the thief decided to steal all of his clothes and his mule and stuff like that. And the rest of the party let him do it, and alignments being what they were. And so when they get to town, that thief decided he was not going to pay for room and board. He was just going to go to the local temple of that particular order and claim his his right of hospitality there. He's going to room and board it, eat their food, use their beds, and pretend to be a priest. And then on the way out, he stole the holy symbol off their altar that was made of solid gold, and took all the holy water out of their little cistern and thought nothing of it. And then later on had the audacity to try and invoke their god to try and heal a party member who was dying. And I had just read the article in Dragon on divine curses. And I'm like, all right, here's a great opportunity to play with that. So yeah, he managed to get the guy healed, but then managed to take every point of damage that he healed off the guy.
Right.
But again, consequences, right? I didn't feel like I was being a dick. I mean, he literally was being a blasphemer to this order and preying upon them. And this is also the same guy who, while the town crier was addressing a town square full of people, and tried to pick the town crier's pockets. Like, all eyes are on him, and he's like. And he failed, and I'm like, he rolled the success, but I still ruled that he failed. He's like, well, I succeeded. I'm like, dude, the guy is the center of attention. So you're not that good. But yeah, I always like to have the players' consequences count when we're running, and I think that's important with the low level encounters, and that's kind of bringing it back. How they act in those low level encounters can inform other parts of the campaign. If they burn down the merchant's house trying to get rid of the rats in the cellar, that's not going to do well for their reputation locally, right? Or if they accidentally end up killing the merchant, or even let's say we go with one of those expanded plot lines. They find out that the merchant's up to shenanigans, by poking around in his basement. Then, and let's say they end up confronting him and killing him. Well, they may know what's up, but is the rest of the town gonna take too kindly to them having killed the seemingly kindly old merchant who's helpful and lets everybody buy on credit? And that's you have to keep that stuff in mind. Let's see, going over some of the comments here.
To
a
crush
Viking
your
escape.
enemies. You see them driven before you. They hear the lamentations of the women.
A Viking saga. You know, I have a campaign I want to run talking about story-based campaigns that starts with that basically has all the players play members of a Viking-esque household who managed to escape the destruction of their family, and then the whole campaign is basically them getting the power and the allies and the tools to try and come back and take what is theirs. But on my large stack of campaigns, I'd love to run someday. The last one I tried to run that was a themed campaign died due to the eternal conflict with player schedules and stuff, and that was the all dwarf campaign.
That is the ultimate monster, not printed in the monster manual.
Yep.
We did do back in the day. We did an all paladin campaign.
Oh, that
And
could
that
be cool.
That was fucking fun. That was
Nice
really,
around.
really fun. It
Yeah,
was
Until
ridiculous.
one person violates their oath and is no longer a paladin.
Oh, that happened actually. Yeah. And then we all went on an epic quest to regain his honor. You know, it was absolutely ridiculous because we're all lawful good, you know, paladins riding around the countryside doing what we thought was noble deeds. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. It didn't last too long, but yeah, it was good fun.
I think themed campaigns can be fun, and they can also inform a lot of your low-level fodder adventures too. Like, you know, think about like in your paladin game, those simple nightly quests that are so, you know, tropish really fit there. You know, save the damsel, kill the little, you know, find the cockatrice and kill it. You know, my castle, my keep is under siege by bandits. You know, help me, because you know, paladins, of course, are gonna a group of paladins is gonna have a little higher than average effectiveness at low levels than most parties would have. I mean, they've got the healing and the fighting all taken care of. The only thing they don't really have is the rogue, but depending on the adventures they're going through, they're not even going to need
You
it.
will need it. That protection from evil, especially in first ed, is so unbelievably powerful. It's worth the paladin alone. If they only had that ability, it would be worth it.
The only game I ever played in, and I was a player that had multiple paladins in the party, was after the article in Dragon had come out with the paladin of every alignment, which is a great article, and because it's not just a paladin that's reskinned with a different alignment. Every one of them is a different character class, you know, different abilities, different spells, spell lineup and stuff, so they're really worth it. We had like a classic paladin in the party, and then somebody was playing like a neutral good paladin or something like that, and they're like, and so there's this constant back and forth between the two paladins about like who was right, because they were both good. One was just lawful good and one was neutral good. It's a very philosophical debates between two paladins. Let's see. Enjoy low-level adventures. The monster becomes the star at higher. It's at low-level adventures. That's another thing. That's what I was saying earlier too. Is I don't think there's any excuse for boring encounters at low-level adventures, because we have how many books full of monsters, even for just AD&D. You know, we got 2 monster manuals and a fiend folio. Plus stuff that's in the deities and demigods, if you have access to that, and then everything else that third-party publishers had written. You can also pull in all of the monsters from BX pretty easily if you needed some extra stuff. So, an ogre at low levels, a single ogre who's maybe harassing the town or eating the farmer's sheep or whatever, you know, is a good focus for a quest. And you can ham it up, because you can pull out your best Bugs Bunny, you know, oh, I am the ogre kind of voice, you know, and you know, play him up. And, you know, me not bad, me just hungry.
Well, that's another thing, is giving personality, you know, like you were just talking about, to those low level creatures and encounters and stuff. Like even the goblins, you know, I tend to switch up the personality of the goblins or the ogre or the orcs or whatever every game I play, you know, and you give those things personality, it becomes a little bit more interesting, right?
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier, I'm gonna keep coming back. Even the rats in the basement, What happens when one of the party members randomly decides to try and talk to the rat, and the rat responds?
Right.
Like looks, shows awareness. Okay, what the hell is this merchant up to? And they find out that the rats are actually just people he's turned into rats and kept in his basement.
Yeah.
He wants the party to kill them because, well, he can't murder. It'll be his way of legitimately not having murdered those people.
Of course, when a polymorph creature is killed, it turns back to its original form. So
well, that's
all
fine.
the rats would revert.
The party can carry that guilt. Wait a minute, that's the other merchant and his family that disappeared. What have we done? And the paladin's like, oh my god, no! What have I done? There goes all my powers. But
having a paladin in that scenario would actually be good, because then the party is easily exonerated, because the paladin just explains what's done. It's like, well, does this paladin still have his divine grace and can't be lying? So yeah, what's going on, merchant?
There you go. And RW, aren't paladins a bunch of dicks? Only when people play them wrong. It's the people who play lawful good as lawful stupid that I think are the paladins who are dicks. Because lawful good doesn't mean you don't get to make the hard choices or do things that might seem bad, but ultimately are not. Or, its alignment isn't absolute. It's a sliding scale.
I mean, paladins have strictures they have to abide by more so than others, even other lawful goods.
Yeah, they have their code.
What I do is I actually, for rangers and paladins, I draw up their oath that they have to abide by, and literally hand it to the players. Like, read this and know it, because if you violate this, you are no longer a paladin or a ranger. And that actually helps, because people will have it in front of them and say, oh, okay, yeah, if I speak a word that is unknowingly speak a word that is untrue, boom, done.
There you go. No, it's interesting. I'd be interested. Do you, when your paladins cross those lines, do you have them immediately lose their power, or do you kind of have it be a matter of an accumulated transgression?
It depends on the severity. Now, it hasn't happened because, again, the players who run the paladin, and a ranger as well, in first ed, a ranger has to remain good, right? So, but they honor the strictures, because as players they're looking. It's like, okay, my abilities will be taken away if I violate this. So they'll often have debates about it. They'll question. The paladin will call out other players, because we have in my AD&D game, there's obviously a paladin and a monk. Both are lawful good. Then they've got a chaotic good ranger, a chaotic good priest, a cleric of Timora, and they're always butting heads, because the paladin is like, no, these kobolds have surrendered. They're our prisoners, right? And then the chaotic priest is like, they're kobolds. Let's execute them. We'll do it humanely, but they're still kobolds. Excuse me.
But
sorry about that.
No, I mean that's the thing. I think the problem with paladins being perceived as dicks is a lot of times comes from just bad players, bad quote unquote, and also DMs who maybe are. I will throw some of that back to the DMs. A lot of DMs I feel are overly restrictive in their interpretations of alignments in some cases.
It's possible, yeah.
Yeah, I am the last guy to try and put all the blame of bad campaigns on players because I've seen far too many just horrible DM calls. It's there are some DMs out there who just clearly are adversarial.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Or just
there's nothing to be done for it. I mean, you have to. I mean, I think it's a phase of. I mean, as younger, I was at sort of on an adversarial level. So, I got to beat the players. I got to challenge them and beat them. And you got to learn that objectivity, that sort of neutral arbiter role.
I think one of my worst experiences. There's two examples I remember of running into DMs where I just kind of face bombed. and I was not in the games. There were actually games that were happening behind me while I was playing other games. One was in a shop, and this guy was running an X-Files game back in the 90s, and he was running, I think he was using GURPS or something like that. He was using another system to run X-Files, and this is one of those DMs who wants to be the star of his table and has collected a group of crony-esque players who all just like kiss up to him and stuff like that. And I hate to characterize the guy like that, but man, if you listen to him, he'd be like simple things that the players would do. He's like, "Oh, you get some bonus XP for that." I'm like, "They started a car." I mean, it wasn't that like, basic investigative, things as investigators. They like, and you look up his file. That was really good. I'm like, oh, head shake. And then the other one was at a convention. I'm sitting there playing Warhammer at one table, and behind me, I could hear the guy running the D&D game. And it's like, and you open the great vaulted doors, scream, sound effects he does at the table. And he's like, and inside you see 5 adult red dragons. I'm like, what? I'm like, literally could not hold it in. I'm like, didn't look at his table, but from looking at my opponent and playing 4M or 40K, I'm like, what? Like out loud.
5 adult red dragons in a 10 by 10 foot room.
I mean, this better be a fucking illusion. Behind that is some simpering kobold wizard. Don't kill me. Like 5 adult red dragons. Are you freaking kidding me? Oh yeah, you and your badass unwinnable con game. I mean, there was another example at that same convention, and the DM's describing how like it was a different game. I wasn't there to role play. I was there to play 40K. I had squats that I needed to play and kill people, but and the DM describes that they come to this door. It's a metal door with a copper door handle, right? And on the floor is an X etched into the floor stone that's made out of copper. And I'm like, and I had to bite my tongue. I'm like, if somebody doesn't realize this is an electricity trap, I'm gonna scream. You got a big conductive iron door with a copper handle, and you're standing on a copper X on the floor. Come on, man. Don't touch that door. But no. But that's really off topic, but it was just no, man. I'm just gonna kill some space elves. Minding my business.
Omanel's joined us. Hello, Omanel.
Hey, Omanel. Welcome. Only allowed 1d4. I thought he wasn't following. Well, maybe it was one. And the thing is, I kind of tuned out after he said that. So for all I know, it was one dragon casting mirror image or something like that.
Not an unreasonable situation, I guess.
No, I mean, especially if it's an adult red dragon and AD&D dragons that actually had magic
and spells. Yeah.
There were, speaking of dragons and dragon magazine articles, there were some dragon magazines that could make dragon encounters nightmarish, because there was a few dragon articles that talked about magic items specifically made by and for dragons, and like dragons that would go out and have armor made for themselves and stuff like that. It's like, I'm an intelligent creature with a lot of money. What am I going to do? Like, I am sitting on like 200,000 gold pieces. I'm pretty sure I can afford a custom suit of armor. And I've got all these magic items in my hoard. Why am I not using them? Oh. I think that's a follow-up to this comment.
Yeah. No, I had replied. I said, "What, you want to hurt the wizard?"
Oh, there we go. Yeah, traps I think are good at low levels. I think I would agree with you there, because honestly, the players may not be so invested in their characters yet too, so you're probably going to get less backlash from, my first level thief dying due to some, Grimtooth trap that you pulled out of Volume 3.
John's cracking the whip, trying to put us back on track here.
Let's see.
I actually did briefly consider that as as a sort of an end game gag where Ace Eric turns out to be Merlinster Gandalor in the far flung future. But I can confirm I have definitively decided against that.
If you ever decide to get more puppets involved, you should get an apprentice for Merlinster Gandalor. If I can actually say
There's
that
a
word.
new character to be introduced. I'm sort of waiting in the wings.
I know you started using the imp a little bit more as just a side gag character.
Yeah,
that's fun. Next thing you know, you're gonna have your own damn Muppet show.
Yeah, exactly. The Mage's Muppet Show.
You be the Jim Henson of fantasy. You're gonna get like summoned to Gen Con to do performances, which I could actually see happening, and would be awesome.
I have to up my game on the writing. I've been watching the Muppet Show lately, just the old 70s, and it's like, okay, yeah.
Speaking of which, I found a really cool channel called Muptown Funk, which is a Muppet lore channel.
Hello, you.
Really cool channel, and it's a pretty new channel too. But also there is, I think I actually shared it with you. There's an entire channel on puppeteering out there. This guy talks about easy build puppets and complex build puppets and how, performance with puppets and stuff like that. It's really cool channel. Let's see. Yes, your Sactius. I don't need more Sactius. I was playing in his game yesterday, and so I had my Sactius fill for the week. Oh my God, that game. We marched on the Kuotoa village, and then he started placing all the tokens on the VTT for all the Kuotoa. I'm like, I'm like, you do realize there are only 5 of us, right? It's like this whole village of Kuotoa that we're supposed to attack with some NPC help. Yes, dog grief.
She's giving me a hint, so I mean, I figure once you're done here, I'll take her out to the park and run her ragged.
Yeah, my dog is quieted down, so he must have got used to people being here. But so we're in the last half hour, actually, coming up in the last half hour. Anybody have any other choice bits of wisdom for low-level encounters, low-level adventures that they wanted to extol upon the viewer?
Embrace death.
Yeah, I don't be afraid of killing characters
or dying. Play your character to survive. Play him as a character who, a person in that situation. You're in a dangerous situation. You're a person, not an avatar. In a game, but accept it. Like be willing to let go of your characters.
Yeah, Cody, what about you?
Another thing I was going to say, and it's pretty obvious, but one thing I've found is if you have a really great start to a campaign, usually it's going to be a great campaign. So I try to make that first adventure not necessarily the best one, but I try to have a really, really good start, because from there it's going to expand really well. We can have more great adventures. If it's a dud, I found it can be salvaged, but a really great start always pays off, I think.
Yeah. Now, let me follow that up then. What do you think is a good formula for a solid start for a campaign?
A good formula,
or not even a good formula, just even a couple of examples. I know that may not come down to a formula that you think about, like consciously.
Well, it's always a challenge to come up with a good start for a campaign. I've had some cool ones. Like one I actually started the players in the dungeon, right? Mm-hmm. That's where they started. They woke up. Yeah, they woke up. They were in a dungeon, had to work their way out of a dungeon into the wilderness with very few resources. They were captured, but whatever monsters were in the dungeon, I don't remember at this point. I think they were drow or something. The slaver thing's always fun. I know it's an old trope, but it's a really fun way to start an adventure. I
Players
love
hate
that.
that. Players hate captivity. It's one of the
They do.
things they'll suicide a character over. One thing I used to do, I don't do it anymore because most of my players know the trick, but is I would start. They're on a quest. They're on a hunt. Some goblins have taken a local woman, and they're part of the posse hunting down this group of goblins. And of course, they find the goblins. That's railroaded. I play the fight out normally. I let them strategize. I let them do their thing. 9 times out of 10, they get themselves killed, or mostly killed. And then boom, reveal it was all a training mission with the local militia. And then they cry foul, but they've learned their lessons. I have the drill instructors like, okay, so now what have we learned? Right. So they get that's their gimme, that's their mulligan. They get their fake death. But then when the real encounters happen, it's a matter of, oh crap, we've got to be careful. Remember what happened during training? We nearly died. Right.
I ran a dream sequence as a start to a campaign once. They had this big epic battle and they all died in the dream, but I let them keep the XP because they learned something. So they didn't feel cheated. I mean,
I give them the XP for the training. It's fair, right? But
so Cody, what about you?
As far as what?
Well, starting games.
Well, I just mentioned couple.
Oh, did I miss that? Wow. I'm not awake. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mentioned, the one where I started them in a dungeon.
Oh,
another fun one I like to do is just
ADHD
shit
brain.
hits the fan right off the gate. They walk into town, and 10 minutes later it's attacked by, a fucking army, or a sorcerer just appears and all his minions just teleport into the town, and it's all hell breaks loose or whatever, and that leads into the starting adventure. I've always liked that one, where just bam, right off the get-go, we're in action. There's a little bit of downtime at the beginning. All seems nice and peaceful, and it seems like a typical start to an adventure, and then just things go south really quickly.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great one actually, to have an attack that sets the tone for the world, especially if you've got sort of a larger scale story going. It's a really good way to do it. Like, goblins raid your town, and like, okay, initially it seems like goblins or bandits or whatever, and then later on you find out that they're minions of Sauron. Not necessarily, but I have started a campaign with all my players, all the characters in a way, basically Skyrim style, in a wagon being taken somewhere.
Yeah.
Then they were really like, oh great, and then they got there and they were given all of their equipment back, and they're like, all right, see that temple? You're gonna go run this temple for us. You're gonna go in there and explore it. And they're like, well, why us? They're like, because the two other bands we sent in there never came out.
Never came back.
And so they find out that the local and all of them had a vague recollection of having a sit-down meeting with a posh man wearing a turban and who had a purple beard the night before they woke up in this cart. So after they got out of that temple, which was this snake-themed temple that they had a lot of fun in, their whole goal was to find the man with the purple beard. Right? We're gonna find the man with the purple beard. But I think that's also a good thing if you can seed something into that initial setup that really, you're talking about a good start right there. Regardless of what other adventures, every town they'd go to, they'd ask about like the man with the purple beard.
Sure. Yeah.
And so eventually the man with the purple beard was going to be something that factored in, even if he wasn't like the actual campaign, he would be there. And yeah, the in media res, somebody had pointed out, is what it is, starting with the action. When I run pulp campaigns, I think you almost have to do that. The in media res type stuff. I did do a superhero game starting with a massive epic, like, apocalyptic battle, and then turned out to be a training room simulator, like a danger room simulation. So the players got a chance to learn their characters' powers, learn the system, get in a big old knockdown drag out fight. So that was all out of the way. So it was literally training for the players in the superhero game system. But then, end program, they're in the big empty room with all X-Men
I
style.
think thinking about it, years and years ago, probably been 20 years ago when I did this, I had a pretty cool start to a campaign. I did all the characters were resurrected from ancient heroes. And so they started off and they were in the heavens, and they were in paradise and all this stuff. And then they, whatever God was like, come with me. And they're like, what? We're here in paradise and all this stuff. And they get ushered into, and then he's like, I need you to go back. I can't put you back in, to the power level and the bodies you were in before. You're going to start off as, basically he was explaining to them that they're not going to be the epic badass heroes they were. But in their minds, they knew that. So, it started off as a resurrection story and they were sent back to the world and they're just these lowly peons and had to work their way back up. But they knew a little bit about what they had to do. They knew they had a purpose, but they had to build up to that purpose. So that was, you can come up with all kinds of interesting ways to start off a campaign. And you don't have to do anything crazy either,
Yeah. A good one is, I think you can draw from classic folklore and mythology a lot too, where the call to action for your party members doesn't necessarily have to be you're sitting in an inn. It could be a town crier. It could be the king's men rounding up every able-bodied man. And you're like, well, the party members are all first level characters.
Well,
so they're
first level
able-bodied.
character is an elite. That's what a lot of people don't consider is zero level is the norm. And a first level character has exceptional training and skill.
Yeah, and that's when you're doing that, the king has the kingdom needs you, and they all get rounded up and they get taken to a place or told to muster at a spot, and they're like, well, what are we here for? Well, here's the deal, and you can kick off your adventure, like whether it's a dragon or there's an enemy on the border. We need scouts to go into the neighboring land. Those are all things that you can use too. But those I think are good ways to kick off games. What you don't want to do is have really just lackluster blah beginnings. And so the beginning of the campaign is you're going to escort this caravan and nothing happens, or it's a really boring trip. If they're going to escort the caravan, then maybe plan to have some big exciting thing happen on the way. Conan and his fellows raid the caravan like he was so wont to do.
Yeah.
You could introduce some of the world politics in your game if that's the direction you're going by. Kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, maybe the bandits aren't the bad guys. Or is what's the caravan carrying? One of the barrels falls off of the wagon in the middle of the fight and cracks open, and there's a person inside. Slavers, or maybe it's a mummy inside, and what the hell's going on now? But yeah, let's see. Started a game with a mini LARP. That could be fun.
Players, huh?
But that requires a huge investment. I do like the old Vampire the Masquerade angle of the prelude. That was always a fun idea, where each player gets to play a little bit of their character, and before they get together. I think that's always a fun one. Rat race style game. Let's see. We're losing John. Well, see you later, John. Thanks for coming by. Enjoy your curry. But yeah, I don't understand, to be honest, why people have built early encounters. Kind of like, yes, we're in the summing up part of the stream here. I'm not sure where the trope developed, because like I said, there's a lot of games that have really good, solid early level stuff. But also I don't understand why it perpetuates, because you do read some pretty flat early encounters. So I'm not this is also one of those things where I do wonder if it is a trope that exists in contrast to the actual evidence. You know, being a home brewer, I'm not familiar with a lot of the published material out there, so it could be that the published adventure startups are pretty solid. You know, the low level encounters and the low level adventures, and so the opinion of them has come out from either home brewers or people who have had bad experiences. So that is one caveat I will put out there. Despite everything I've said here, it's very possible that my logic and my experience colors my opinion. So
No, there's some bad starting modules, but a lot of great ones too. So I mean,
yeah,
you take the good with the bad.
yeah, I don't know. It's so I guess real quick. I mean, Sean, any particular adventures you recommend that have good, solid, low level starts?
Well, obviously, I'm going to recommend Keep on the Borderlands. That's
Oh
always a
yeah,
great one. But that's low hanging fruit. There's one that I've used regularly. It gets pretty low reviews, but I think it's pretty solid. It's called the Dimrak Dread. It's a basic module, and it's very simple. It's basically a 2-room dungeon, or well, 2-level dungeon, a couple of rooms in each level, and it's so simple. It's you're hunting goblin raiders. The setup is simple. The layout is good. It's not a stellar epic quest, but I have used it so regularly because it is a good starter module. It is good for low level characters. It's the right sort of challenge. The lower level where you fight some undead, there's a white in there, but so you got to be a little more careful. But you do that separately because the goblins inhabit the upper level. But a normal sized group of first level characters can do this module.
that's cool. Normal size for I'm assuming old school, which is like a 6 to 8 player
Yeah,
party.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's meant
not
for
the
basic D&D.
not the modern 4 player
No,
assumption.
but
Four to
I
six
mean, it would be
characters.
easily converted. I mean, looking at it, like you fight, I think 6 normal goblins and one, effectively a hobgoblin, maybe a little, no, a little more, maybe a bugbear. He's a 3-hit die goblin. He's this big guy, but and then there's a couple of lizard men on that upper level, plus one goblin wizard, one who has a sleep spell, which is the most dangerous part of that module. Actually,
Well, yeah, because old school sleep is gnarly.
is very nasty.
The fact
But
that it does hit dice as opposed to hit
hit
points like the
points,
modern.
yeah. But I think it could be updated easily for a 5th edition game without
Yeah.
too much conversion. You just got to change the stats.
Right now, I'm really trying to actually get myself into running an old school game somewhere. I think I need that that break. But Cody, anything you can recommend for a starter adventure or a?
I've never been a big modules guy,
I
but
knew that, but
I've played some of them, and I have several of them. But one thing I do with modules is I mine ideas from them.
Mhm.
Keep on the Borderlands. We already mentioned that. The Lost City. I've used that idea, if not the actual adventure, which I like that adventure. I've found that's a really cool starting adventure. They're out in the wilderness or the desert or whatever, and they already know each other. They're already established, and they're trying to get somewhere, and they're low on supplies, and they find this big ziggurat or pyramid or cavern or dungeon or whatever, and that's seems like the only hope they have, that they're going to survive. So they go into this place, and it turns into a couple levels of them, working their way through it and getting some treasure or whatever. And then the end, usually what I do is some kind of portal or some kind of way out where they can actually get to a safe haven at the end. So that idea of like the Lost City is really cool. There was another one, and I think it was in Dragon Magazine, and it started off with the players, going to a town, and it starts like raining really hard, or there's like a big storm or blizzard or something, and they take shelter in a cave, and it's like this huge cave system that they can go explore. That idea was really cool, and have something to entice them to explore that, and then that leads into some other hook, whether they find some item or artifact or a letter or a note or whatever. I've done that a few times. then they go back to town, and now you have the starting seeds of a campaign. So
Yeah, I think that's a really a good way to start games too. Is and I kind of mentioned this a bit. Is like the call to action is not necessarily the adventure. Um, you know, you're going and doing a thing, and then you find that note or that letter, or you know, you find the family crest on a corpse somewhere
right,
along the way, and then that then leads to the actual adventure. I think is a good way to go to sow that mundanity that people almost expect for low level adventures into something more worthwhile for them. Um, if you have players who are looking for that little bit extra. And it doesn't necessarily have to pay off immediately. Like they could have that family crest for a while, and then later on
yeah,
down the way they run into either a random or a planned encounter, and you decide that that noble has the same crest. And they're like, oh wait, that's the dude. Or you'll have your players asking every time they encounter a noble, does he have the same family crest? Which is
right,
fine too,
yeah,
because
yeah.
they're engaging
Well,
with
that's
the world.
Yeah.
that's another thing is sometimes I don't have an idea of what the next adventure is going to be, and my players give me an idea, like we were talking about earlier. Like I might say, "Oh, you find this crest or whatever," but for me, I just meant it as a piece of treasure that they were going to go sell or whatever. But they become fascinated with this crest they found on a body, and so I'm like, okay, well, in that case. So I start writing threads about that, right? Or they find some ancient sword with something inscribed on it, and they become infatuated with things that you didn't think they were going to become infatuated with.
Oh yeah, and sometimes you can intentionally lay out things that are absolutely intended to be seeds, but you have nothing for them, even if it's not a random thing too. Because like in one of my 5e games in the early adventures, this this albino woman and her bodyguard approached the party to go to this tower that was on an island in the middle of the lake that their village is set to, and all she wanted out of the tower was the skull of this one nobleman that had died there. And she's like, you can keep whatever else you find. And they were like super suspicious, and they're like, what are you gonna do with the skull? She's like, I just want the skull, no questions asked. And they're like, well, what are you gonna pay me? And she's like, you can keep whatever you find, and I'll owe you. And so they go through this thing, and they get there, and they find the dude laying in the dude's dead body, desiccated corpse in the bed of this old mildewy tower, in the middle of a lake, and he's got a stake through his heart. And they're like, "Oh crap, is he a vampire?" And they're like yeah, his skull has fangs, and and then they're like, they I ended up painting this whole portrait of a very like grim existence for this dude. Like they later on found the corpse of his wife, like desiccated and locked in the dungeon. And like this horrible like fate to this family that was out there. And they got all this treasure, and then at the end they're like, all right. And then forever after, they're like, what the hell was she doing with that skull? Or another adventure, they needed help from this hag because she was the closest magic person that they could get to. And she's like, all right, cool, but I need you to steal this troll skull that's hanging on the wall in this inn in about a week's time away. So it ended up turning into a heist adventure where they go to this inn, and they've got it all planned. We're gonna, in the middle of the night, we're gonna steal this troll skull off the wall. And of course, as a heist, a complication happens. Some of the inquisitors for the kingdom show up and are rooming at that inn after they've already set up the plan to get the skull. So they ended up having to now take the skull out of there while there was a bunch of highly trained king's men there. So, and they return to the skull to the hag, and of course they're like, what the hell is she going to do with this skull? Why does she need a troll skull? It's always like, what are they going to do with these things? But that those things, I didn't have any particular plan for either of those. It was just a MacGuffin and a reason to
yeah,
get them in there, but also that could later on turn into something. Okay, well, now there's an undead troll in the kingdom, or maybe she's using the troll skull for some sort of potion because it is a hag, right? maybe the vampire skull is, going to be used in some sort of necromantic ritual to bring somebody back to life, whatever. But yeah, so. All right. So we are just about to the last 10 minutes here. I'm going to go ahead and real quick, anybody have any particular questions in the comments that they wanted answered?
I just want to address Geek said John says B4 is better than B2. Now I've never run B4. I own it and I've been wanting to run it, but even in reading through it, it's not a matter of better or worse, but I think B4 would be harder to do as a sandbox scenario because you're kind of railroaded into it, and your characters. I mean, you can obviously you can explore it as you will, but you're not in terms of B2. You're on a wilderness setting where you can go where you will, and like the way I play it, we have drop-in characters. We have a rotating cast. I don't think you could do that as well with B4, based on what I've read.
Yeah, Lost City is definitely a hard one to.
You would need a consistent group, yeah,
because it is the setting for the adventure is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
right.
It's a really cool
you
one.
can't have people coming and going. Whereas
I mean, like this is the most well-traveled, desolate area known to man. What is it, Tatooine? Everybody ends up at the Lost City.
Yeah, and then that's sort of my my inhibitor right now for, like, I've seeded Lost City in terms of in my OSC campaign. It's there. They're on the border of the alarm. I've even set it where it's canonically supposed to be placed. But I really, unless the group that goes there commits to it and shows up for every session, it's not going to be a practical one to run.
I think B4 can be seated anywhere too. You don't have to put it in a desert. You can put it.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
I just use the idea of B4. It could be in the forest. It could be some lost elven ruin. It could be up in the mountains. It could you could set it anywhere, really.
Exactly.
It's just some remote wilderness location.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know my plan to run Isle of Dread. I don't like the ending of Isle of Dread. So I'm going to put Lost City actually at the end of Isle of Dread.
Right. So
there you go.
And instead of the temple and go in.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's that little temple bit with the Kopru in Isle of Dread. I don't like it. It's boring. So I'll substitute Zargon for the Kopru, and and then have that plan with the Ulman culture that's there and all of that. So, but yeah, I think B4 is a good one you can seed it anywhere. It works on its own, but on its own, you would have to have a dedicated group. You couldn't have a revolving.
Yeah, you can't have a revolving team.
I think adventures like Village of Hamlet, which is an AD&D adventure, but you can. I mean, AD&D and BX are relatively interchangeable. Village of Hamlet's a great one to just use as a canvas,
as a location.
I mean, absolutely. My thoughts are, if you're going to be running D&D and you've got Keep on the Borderlands right there, you could always put Village of Hamlet up the road.
Absolutely, I've done that before.
Yeah, Village of Hamlet is up the road, and like you put Castle Caldwell in the area.
Yep.
There's no reason, and especially and I remember having a conversation with somebody about, like, there are too many castles in your setting. I'm like, do you realize how dotted a countryside is of castles in the Middle Ages? Because it's only X amount of territory covered by each castle. So having a bunch of castles within a few days travel of one another is not unheard of.
Well, it's a refuge point, right?
Well, yeah, it's a control point too.
Yeah.
And you can only control so much, or you were only granted so much, but you have to protect what's yours. So, and they don't all have to be major castles. Like, they're not all going to be Keep on the Borderlands. They might be Castle Caldwell, or they could just be a keep, just like one tower, like the moat house at Village of Hamlet, so you can vary that. Like in my current campaign, my 5e campaign, the countryside is dotted with abandoned and half-built keeps, because there was a period where nobility was moving in, and then they just kind of pulled back and left because they realized that the land was too hard to forge out any profit in existence for like this place sucks. We're going back to the kingdom. And so there's all these abandoned strong points all over the place that now monsters and bandits and things exist in. But it gives plenty of places to dot adventures too, because it's like, all right, you're gonna go delve a keep. But yeah, let's see. No other comments here. So, all right. Well, we are down to just a few minutes. I think it's a good time to call it. Cody, Mage's Musing, Sean, thanks for joining me. Both Cody and Mage's Musings have good channels. Mage's, if you want to pitch your channel real quick.
I do game recaps, I do theory craft, and I do general silliness, all with puppets. There's my elevator pitch.
Cody?
Yeah, I don't have an elevator pitch. I just do whatever the hell I want, and I don't really care. So I do live streams. I'm going to be doing. I do a Prowlers and Paragons game every other Sunday, which will be this next coming Sunday, and I am starting an OSC campaign, I guess, on the alternating Sundays.
Oh,
and then in between that, usually about once a week, I do a different kind of video. Sometimes I just turn on the camera and talk about, various games, and going really in depth and spend like an hour and a half or 2 hours, like really long form, talking about, I might look through the AD&D second edition player's handbook and really go through the depth of it. Or
Cody is
I did
selling himself
Barbarians
short because his channel is really good if you like lore type stuff, because like deep delves and stuff, because those occasional videos that he's talking about are really good, and he digs in pretty well into the topics that he covers. So and he's a pretty damn good GM when he's running Prowlers and Paragons, if I can actually talk. But we also had in chat, we had You'll Geek, who has his own channel that Sean and I appear on pretty frequently. And let's see, I didn't see any other channel folks in here that I know of. So with that said, I hope everybody picked up some useful tidbits on low-level adventure crafting, design, running, ways to skew things. I think there's a lot that you can use those low-level encounters for in your campaigns. You can plant the seeds for bigger things. You can use them as diversions for play. I mean, the low level is a good time to like kind of suss out what your players really enjoy playing too, because you can like throw out a lot of little monster of the weeky kind of things if you wanted to, and see what sticks. But yeah, it is definitely something to look at and to work through. And thank you for everybody who showed up and was in the comments making great comments that we could riff off of. I am going to go ahead and say goodbye and see you guys next Sunday. And,
Cheers, everyone.
Have a good one.
See ya.
And we're